Rebecca, I am so excited to drop in with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Emily, it's a delight. Thank you for having me. I'm excited as well.
Yeah, there's so many astrologers and people sharing about astrology, which is so beautiful. And I just have to say, the way that you share and teach about astrology really resonates with me. And I'm so grateful to be having this conversation together today. And, there's so much happening during this time that I'd love to get into with you. But, first, I just want listeners to be able to connect with you and your story. I know that you've studied astrology since I believe you were 13 years old. So I'd love to hear more about how you got started and your journey up into this point with astrology.
Thank you. And first, thank you for that reflection. To me, astrology really is a poetry of life. And um, I guess going back to 13 years old, 13, 14. Well, when I was 13, I was living in West Africa. And I life there was very colorful and rich and vibrant. And we lived in the middle of a community, not like off in some American little enclave, but it was in the middle of a wonderful Fulani African community. And often there would be dances and rituals that would go on for days, and singing and beautiful colors, great food, and everybody sharing everything. And it's in a place where people really didn't have much at all. Maybe just like 3 pieces of tin sometimes per house, and always had food outside their door. So it's extremely communal and colorful. So at 13, I was there, and my father's an anthropologist. And at 14, we got dropped into, out of all places, South Carolina. I'm a native New Yorker, so South Carolina was very strange. Um, but coming from that sort of like rich tapestry and life force of Africa to like some really desaturated suburban America was really disjointing. And I think if we're going back to that time period, I was just like, what is this life even? How can there be this and then there's this? And how can I go from that to this? And for many reasons, I was just like searching. I was like wondering, what is this life all about? And how can I feel something again and see colors and understand there's meaning in this? Because there was definitely a sense of meaning that was coursing through life there that you felt. Um, so I was definitely reading a lot of books, getting into some like tarot, reading I Ching. I was just kind of searching around adjacent to astrology at that time. And then I just got a job babysitting. This fateful babysitting job at a neighbor's house, and she happened to be an astrologer. So at the time, I was already reading these Carl Jung books I had found, and just fascinated with the intersection of Carl Jung, I Ching, tarot, and astrology. First of all, seemed to suddenly put together. I opened the books at her house, my love for psychology, astronomy, and it was certainly some beautiful organizing system of the world. And basically, the kids were asleep, and I pulled all her books down from the shelf. I strewed them all across a kitchen table, and she came home and was like, "What are you doing?" "Oh, you found my astrology books." And I was just like, "Yeah, we got to talk." So I guess that's how it started.
Mm. I love that quest because I feel like what I relate to in your story, though I found astrology much later, is just this quest of, you know, wanting to know, wanting to go deeper, having a remembrance of a language, which, astrology is, and so just going deeper and deeper into that language. And so there's so much happening in this language that is being written right now in the stars as we move. We're in 2025 at the time of this recording, and Saturn just moved into Aries. It's such a potent time with all the outer planets changing signs. I'd love if you could just break down from your vantage point some of the most significant transits that are happening at this time.
Yeah, this is, I mean, probably one of the most potent years, I think, in history. Literally, I mean, we have 5 planets changing sign in 1 year, and this never happens. Excuse me. Okay, so let's break it down. 2025, why is 2025 so important? Starting with Pluto, Pluto first went into Aquarius, and Pluto generally takes 246 years to change sign. So that's the first mover and shaker. And secondly, um, we had late March, Saturn going into Aries, and then late May, Neptune going into Aries. And then I think around June 9th, Jupiter goes into Cancer. And then in July, Uranus moves into Gemini. But I think we just gotta like step back a bit first and say what does it mean? Planets going into signs for anybody listening that doesn't really understand what we're talking about when we say that. What are we actually talking about? Emily, can we go there? Can we just kind of
Yes.
like
Yeah.
take it back to like the substrates of reality that all of this birthed from? Because essentially, I mean, I see it like this. The planets are spinning, right? Essentially, they are these balls of rock, helium, nitrogen, different kinds of things, right? And they are essentially spinning around our sun. And these are all energy. This is form and energy. This planetary dance creates somewhat of a symphony of energy. And there's different measures. There's more dramatic parts, there's calmer parts. It's in a way, it is the music of the spheres. It is this dance of eternity of all of the planets just moving around our sun. And essentially, it is a story of consciousness. It is a story of consciousness that we play out. Um, it wouldn't know itself if humanity wasn't able to fully live it out. So, planets represent each a unique substrate of consciousness. Moon, the emotional body, Mercury, the mental body. Essentially, they represent all parts of our being. Pluto, our evolutionary need to die and be reborn. Uranus, the energy of breakthrough and revolution, the higher mind, the higher octave of Mercury. Neptune represents the essence of transcendence, where we find God, whether through music or dance or prayer or meditation, but that connection to something that is divine beyond us. So each planet represents something unique. Jupiter, expansion, Saturn, contraction. And so all of the planets and in their personalities are moving in this unique dance, telling story, right? And Venus love, yeah, and Mars war, and you know, um, so in this moment that you and I are here right now, it's like the symphony, the planetary symphony, was playing a song for so many hundreds of years. This unique kind of song with this rhythm in the background, and all of a sudden, within a period of 4 to 5 months, every we're not in the key of C anymore, okay? We're in the key of G. And the whole new instrumentation. There's an entirely new program of consciousness that is coursing through humanity. And over the last 4 months, one after another, the radio stations have all been changing. All of the instruments have been being swapped out. And so what does that mean for us? Yes, we could say, okay, a lot of people say humans are learning new codes, but what does that actually mean in English? Like, I want to get away from this jargon and look at like, what are we actually talking about? What it means that the entire program that our sun, our radio station, is blasting out has just changed.
Yeah, I love that. This really sets the tone for where we're moving and what's transpiring. And I love how you compare it to music because I feel like we're understanding the music of the spheres in an entirely different way at this time, and really truly connecting with the truth that it is all energy and we are impacted by the movements of planetary bodies. And I love how you break down kind of some of the significance of what each planetary body represents in our consciousness. And so one of the things that I feel like perhaps as a starting point is maybe, the shift of these energetic bodies from Pisces into Aries. You mentioned Neptune moving into Aries and Saturn moving into Aries. Well, what does that mean?
That's a great place to start. The movement from Pisces to Aries, and what does that mean in the larger symphony of consciousness, time, space? Where are we going right now in 2025? So yeah, Neptune takes basically 14 years in a sign, and we're talking about Saturn, who takes 2.5 years in a sign. And they both were hanging out in Pisces prior. So I think to understand where we're going into Aries, we have to understand Pisces. So in a sense, we're going from liminality into form, Aries, into a bold mark. And this always reminds me of like emergence, like the Big Bang, something that comes out of the vastness, liminality. And all of a sudden there's a spark of life, like a fresh new start. Pisces is that whole field. It's like the womb and it's the everything, but nothing is yet delineated. And Aries is the first mark of delineation. So in a way, humanity's been swimming. We've been swimming in these waters of Pisces. With Neptune and Pisces for the last 14 years, we saw we saw the rise of spirituality. We saw the rise of astrology, shamanism, yoga, occultism, magic, all these kinds of things that are very much represented by Pisces, as Pisces represents what is liminal, what is esoteric, what is unseen. And it ultimately the desire is to connect us to the all, to the vastness.
Mm-hmm.
So Neptune's at home in Pisces. Neptune's like, yeah, I want to merge with the all and become one. And so Neptune and Pisces was kind of like a perfect soup in some ways, but it can also be a perfect disaster in other ways. So we could talk about the spectrum and what we saw as Neptune reached the end of Pisces. So Neptune rules what a culture finds sexy at the moment. For religion, for fashion, for music, what we lust after. And we were definitely lusting after these Piscean things. People wanted to kind of check out too. And I'm going to say that as Neptune moves into Aries, as it just did like a couple days ago, right? Quite recently,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Saturn. Yeah, Saturn. Saturn did. Neptune back in late March. So as Neptune just moved into Aries, though, we can start to think about form. What are we actually creating? So what we're going to be as a culture moving towards now is an element of bold creation.
Mm.
It is about a stark new beginning. So we were swimming in this field. I'm going to say there was a lot of like spiritual tourism. We saw over the last 14 years, people going from this to that, jumping around to various kinds of spirituality. You see like words from very different kinds of indigenous tribes in the same ceremony. This is very Piscean and, this kind of mixing and melding and merging. But ultimately this desire to transcend. But Aries says, what are we transcending for? Where are we going? What are we learning from all of this gathering of what is the purpose of this transcendence? So the universe is asking us, and the universal song is saying there's going to be a kind of like grand entrance to a brand new substrate of consciousness, a brand new march, and it's us and our humanity that is ultimately here to channel and animate and give words, give architecture, give art, give animation to what this Aries is. So it's like, I think there's a part of us that has to get out of the story of opting out and resignation and into the story of taking a bold step forward and trusting our mark. even if we don't know 5 steps ahead, you know the next step ahead, and we have to take that move. Because if we don't, somebody else will. This is the moment for us to take action and for us to act. Aries doesn't know what it's going to do 10 steps ahead, but it knows this is my instinct right now. And I think we all have to get used to trusting our instinct, which has been kind of scraped away from an early age. We're not really taught to trust our instinct and trust our feeling and to act on that. I think that's going to be increasingly more important with Neptune and Aries. We can talk about Saturn too, but I'm just sharing, I guess, that to start with.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. This is so good. And I love taking bold, creative action, not knowing all the steps ahead, which, how relevant at this time where, so much is moving and shifting, but just following our spark and taking that initiatory, courageous step forward. And so, you shared some of the themes for Pisces. What might be for Aries some of the things that perhaps are, emerging that people are resonating with in a new way?
Yeah. So some things we might want to also watch out for. Can we talk about that too? Because we always as Neptune got into the end of Pisces, you see all of the dregs, all of the bottom, whatever at the bottom of the ocean of a sign come up. So right now we just saw the end of Pisces show up. We saw real misuses of spiritual power, abuses of power, under the name of religion or spirituality. God told me to do it, whether it's about governance, cult leading, or sexuality, or, there's these kinds of things that are coming up that are just, no, we can't get these just distortions. And that's what happens at the end of any sign. You will see all the distortions show up. So let's preemptively look at what might be distortions of Aries and how can we prevent that ahead of time as well. Because we just saw a lot of distortions come up from Pisces.
Wow. Yeah.
So what does that look like? Distortions of Aries. The biggest one is authoritarianism.
Mm.
The biggest one is imperialism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism is the kind of single person taking all power for a group of people and acting recklessly. That can be the shadow of Aries energy.
Say more. Can you kind of deep dive into more of the shadows around Aries energy?
Um, I mean, I think we're already starting to see it. And we've just entered. So I do think astrology is a unifier that can bring our collective together as one humanity when we start to attune to what frequency we're working with. Because essentially, once you talk about it, you give it a name. Hold on. I'm so sorry. I'm just getting over a little cold. Um, but once we give something a name, and we call it out, and it's no longer the shadows in the basement of our consciousness, then it exists in a different space. It doesn't act out as much. So I think it's important to talk about these things. I'm glad you asked about the shadows more, and to just call them out as they are and put them in the light. Turn the lights on in the basement. And I wish that the whole world was having these kinds of conversations right now and using astrology in congruence with governance and things like that. We could use that.
Yeah, and what you're sharing kind of brings up for me like the micro of the macro. Like we may see this on like a global scale of like authoritarianism and different uses and abuses of power. But then it also brings up for me is like what's happening on a micro level with regards to each of our shadows and diving deeper into those. Like for Aries, it's like how are we handling anger? How are we handling power? How are we utilizing our energy?
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you brought it to the personal level because you're right. Everything is absolutely macro and it's personal too. Um, I think, well, when we talk about Pluto and Aquarius, we should talk about leadership and what this word decentralization actually means across all the verticals of life. Because there's decentralization, which Pluto and Aquarius speaks about, but then there's Aries. And Aries power also just sometimes does not sound like decentralization.
Mm.
So I think we have to talk about like what does a clean and healthy Aries energy look like in all of us? And how can we sort of transmute the shadows, which are anger and aggression and lashing out. And what does it look like when there's unprocessed anger in our personal lives? Where does that go? And certainly, if there is unprocessed anger in people and those people happen to be in power, we see it play out on the world stage. So
Absolutely. And, you and I were just, chatting before we started recording of just this time being so potent and distortions in the field being magnified at this time. So, whatever the shadows are, whether they're on a macro or a micro level, for each of us personally, we may be feeling and sensing how this is showing up for each of us individually on a greater scale at this time.
definitely. There's something about this magnification of everything right now too, because if we look at the time period we're in with everything moving into air and fire from earth and water. So we're coming in from this place of dense dense energy and a bit of a heaviness as earth and water. Planets under earth and water are essentially heavy and dense. And you can't just like go straight through a mountain. You can't just like go through an ocean really quickly, but you can fly through air and fire spreads fast.
Mm.
So we're in this time of speed and these vast open vistas of new consciousness. And with all of that air and fire present in the collective, we have to be extremely mindful of our thoughts, our distortions in the field, because we're picking up on a whole lot more out there than we ever have. Um, and maybe this is going into something else we can come back to later, but this sort of alludes to telepathy and the way that AI is building quantum computing, quantum consciousness, and all of that conversation, which is the space of air and fire. And but like also say we're having to become so much more mindful and astute with our thoughts and also our boundaries. And I don't maybe people don't love the word boundaries, but if you hear like the way that the wording of everything now, it's like open AI, open source, open this, everything is open right now, right? And we're coming to the space of big open air. And there's also a shadow of that because when everything's so open, we people can get infected with something that's not theirs. They can receive a signal that's a distortion and act upon it. So how do we prevent that? And how can we see distortions early on and create healthy boundaries of what is a healthy frequency to be living in? Because there's definitely there's a lot out there that people are picking up on now with everything so open. And yeah,
I love that you bring up the increase sensitivity, increase gifts of this time, and also the speed with which, it just feels like moving into fire and air creates almost this time lapse energy of things moving such at a rapid speed. And also, when you were sharing, I just had, the question that came through around perhaps this is for the collective to work with more of healing masculine energy since we move from more feminine, earth and water into air and fire.
absolutely. And I don't even know if we really dealt with healing the feminine when planets were in Pisces. I still think we have more work to do there for sure. Um, But it's interesting right now with, coming back to Neptune and Saturn moving into Aries. It's like, well, leadership. And, we haven't, when I think of Aries, I think of leadership and I think of the leader in each person, agency, your willpower. And this is sort of the opposite of what we've been taught, whether woman or man. It's like follow the rules, take your test, do what you're told. No, you don't know. You don't have an instinct. Listen to do what your doctor says, do what your parents say, do what your teachers say. And so humanity has been really taught not to trust our inner instincts for a really long time. And in a way, this Aries energy is putting us back in touch with something very primal, whether woman or man or whatever. There's something just like this pure instinct that we are all needing to retune our bodies to right now. And if we don't do that, I think it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous to not understand what healthy Aries is.
Mm.
I think we have to, because we are we are the play of this whole solar system. We are the living embodiment of these planets. And it's our choice how we play the song, how we act it out. And right now we all might be witnessing distortions of anger through governance and, maybe in our relationships and homes and things like that. So if we can welcome this in as just like this sort of like grand communal fire of like exorcism, we're throwing these things into the fire to kind of clear out shadows of Aries energy. You look back in time and when planets were in Aries in the past, and it's like the Civil War, gunfire, the sort of glamorization of that. And we've seen so much of that. We've also seen bold movements in spirituality and religion. We've seen the Theosophical Society take form. Madame Blavatsky too. I think it also brings stories of like the mind, enlightenment, and science. With Neptune moving into Aries as well, we're probably going to see science as well getting more so into bed with spirituality, and maybe that coming forth as, I don't even want to use the word religion, but and I know there's so many people that might be talking about these things already over the last decade, but it seems like it's almost taking a new form and becoming accepted. And this has to do with, so-called theoretical physics and quantum physics starting to be taken as science.
Mm. So good. Yeah, that really resonates around the connection of science and spirituality and really being embraced together at this time. And I want to go back to something that you said that was full body chills, which is just the opportunity for personal sovereignty through, this experience at this time. And, you kind of shared about some of the things to maybe work with. And I wonder if we could go back to that of like how to work with this energy. And yeah.
Great. Okay, so like what does this mean when we all wake up tomorrow in our lives and we're in this place of Aries and no longer Pisces? I think there's a part of us all that has been in a space of opting out or resignation for a while. There's people that say, "Oh, I don't know, they're both the same. It's all this, it's all that. What difference will I make?" And this sort of thought process is really not Aries, and it's sort of emblematic of the end of Pisces. We all have to get in this space of, I think there's three things we can control, mainly. And I'm just going to show like what we put in our mind's eye, what we think of, what we visualize is very important. So with Aries, loves it when you create a shape. Like, let's say you want to create something energetically. The universe loves it when you create a shape. Okay, I'm going to put a red circle out there. And I'm very bold in that shape, in that creation. I'm just going to do it. And while we have planets in Aries, the universe is like, I got you in the red circle, and I'm going to hold it there and propel it forward with a motor behind it. So the universe favors bold, courageous action right now. So if you have an idea in your pocket, if you have a business idea, if you have any kind of concept, I think you need to scroll through your contacts, make the phone calls, send the emails, have the conversations now. Don't sit on it. Don't wait. This Aries energy wants immediacy. And like, Emily, the feeling when somebody tells you a fresh idea versus, oh, I've been working on this business plan for 5 years and here's a deck. It feels very stale sometimes, So there's something of this like fresh Aries energy when it's emergent, it's fresh right now. And that's when it needs to be acted upon. So I think what can we do in our lives is to first sit with, I said, three things you can control. One is what you put in your mind's eye. And I always think like building the metaphorical pillars of the temple first is really important to kind of stake out the space energetically of what you're creating, what that really feels like, instinctively what it feels like, and put yourself in it and know what that feels like after it's created. So staking out the space is key. So that's one thing we control, what we put in our mind's eye, right? And then is the words we say and how we use our language, the architecture that language builds. Like the words are the most important thing here. We always say words do build worlds. And the way we use them, especially now with planets moving into air and fire, there's so much more resonance and reverberation in the field. So I want to be so mindful of how we use our language, our choice of words, especially when we talk about our humanity.
Yeah. So, yeah, please go.
Well, the third thing is the position our body is in. And that can be so like what we put in our mind's eye, right? The words we use and our body. So that can be something like whether you're in a mudra or the way your posture is and how you move, what you're moving towards. So this is such a simple thing. These are three very basic parts of being human. But it's like having command over those three will absolutely change your reality very quickly.
Yes, so good. And I'm really connecting with that because, you know, I feel you mentioned the womb space of Piscean energy, and I feel like we've all been in sort of the birth canal, so to speak. And this, for me, feels like rebirthing energy. It feels like anything is possible energy. Like you really, what you want to act upon and what you want to create, that creative potential is potent at this time. And I love how you broke it down into three simple things that we can do to really create our reality. And yeah.
And Aries just wants the very clear, decisive, mindful execution of those things. So it's like, I think we have to start seeing ourselves as creators, as Aries. Like, what does it feel like for you to say, I'm an Aries? You start seeing yourself differently, right?
Wow.
Like you are that mark. It's the first mark on the canvas. It's the energy of creation. And a lot of people don't know, I think now, who they are as creators.
I think we, touched on this last time that we connected of just dreaming an even bigger dream for yourself and humanity and what that even looks like. It'd be, because if you're listening to this and you're like, what is my dream? It's like an invitation, perhaps, to really connect with what your highest vision is.
I love that. I love that invitation. Yeah, I mean, I would encourage everybody to spend more time in that, to really like thaw out on the feelings of Pisces and then say, okay, what is the inspired action coming out of this? And I think these Aries muscles might have gone into atrophy in a lot of us. So it's important to just start small, start using them and see what happens. It's changing patterns. It's changing long time patterns that we've been in and ways of doing things that might have been very entrenched. But it's like if we want to change in our larger systems and everything, then it has to start in all of our personal lives. And I'm seeing this all across the board. We can definitely, especially with Pluto and Aquarius and new leadership models too coming in, but it all has to start in our personal lives. And a lot of it's just like being uncomfortable for a while too and doing things you haven't done before and then noticing you start to get very different results and life starts to change pretty quickly. There is a period where it will be a little bit, who am I actually? What's going to happen if I do this? Is it too much of a risk? Where's my security going to be? And we have to sort of be willing to risk things for a feeling, because if we are just acting and executing in ways because we've always done it that way, nothing's changing.
So good. And what it brought up for me when you shared that about getting uncomfortable was just this idea that, fire has been suppressed, especially in the feminine for so long, and really getting comfortable with whether it's anger or whether it's passion, some of these emotions that are associated with fire is like, how can I work with anger? How can it be, how can I express that? How can I talk about it? Like you said, how can I allow passion to be present, and really embracing some of the fire that's available to us.
Absolutely. And on that note, I mean, I do see a sort of new archetype of the feminine emerging with all of this fire, and one that is bold and fiery and driven by passion, but also crystalline clear. I think we've had a lot of, in the past, these many roles that the feminine has been subjected to, like extreme, almost caricatures of roles, like we had, the 50s homemaker, and the pendulum swung and the 70s feminism, right? And then we saw, um, out of that sprung working woman, the 80s, and like we're looking for equal pay and all of that. Almost kind of like, can we be where men are? Still not articulating a delineation of what it is to be a woman. Can we just get to where men are was the question for so long. And even the sound of that was just like, no, we are something else. And we have to speak into that and like give that a voice and a color and shape and talk about what is the feminine actually. Because it's not just, oh, can we be equal to men? And so I think the language around this conversation has to change, and we have to start asking a deeper question of the role of the feminine, really, which I think is much bigger than, any of that like boss babe or trad wife or all these ridiculous caricatures that have been projected.
Hmm. Yeah. I would love on that just, to move into, because we can't cover it all, but there's so much that is happening at this time. And I love if you could share just some of the other energy that you feel like is really, important to highlight from, this year and perhaps leading into 2027.
Yeah, I feel like we should dive into Pluto and Aquarius, because that is sort of the biggest planetary guard that's moving. Pluto moved from Capricorn into Aquarius. Um, and essentially we're moving from the sort of top-down model. Pluto in Capricorn, um, wherever Pluto is essentially what gains a lot of traction and power in a culture. And then ultimately, by the end of it, we see perhaps its distortion and things blow up, things demise in that too. Like at the end of Pluto in Sagittarius in 2008, we saw the markets blow up and everything, and these guys went to jail and everything. It was a bunch of fake pressing buttons, fake zeros, and fake money. At the end of Pluto in Capricorn, which was 2020, right? Um, we saw the pandemic. And but Pluto in Capricorn for the last 20 years the power was in Capricorn, which was big corporations. And over those 20 years, we saw the Amazons and, all of the large corporations gain all of the power. It was a very top-down lopsided triangle. And as Pluto moves into Aquarius, Aquarius does not rule big corporations. Aquarius rules the people. And so the triangle will become inverse. We're moving from a top down to bottom up.
Mm.
And I know we might look around our world right now and say, I don't know how that can happen. It doesn't look like that. Well, this has 20 years to bake, and a lot will change over these next 20 years. So we want to start thinking about what does decentralization actually mean in our personal lives too? What does this look like? And what is our previous attachments to centralization? And in leadership and in our family, in our relationship, and what do all of these things look like when we keep the center open, when nobody's in the center? And this comes back to when we're talking about like matriarchal or matrilineal societies. It's not that they're women are fully like, I'm in charge, men sit down. It's not like that. It's just that nobody's in the center. And what does it mean? What is in the center but our care for humanity and our care for each other is the main strata of society then, is about everything is, and that's what more of a matriarchal or matrilineal society is about. It's just, it's a difference in values.
Yes. Yeah, I'd love to go into that more. And I feel like this is so good to explore really like Aquarius. What does that mean? The collective and, the sign that's really, associated with the humanitarianism, and I feel like what you're sharing is to go from putting profits at the top, to putting people, like, how does it benefit the collective? How can we move humanity forward?
Mhm.
And so please share more.
Well, we have to also, the shadow of Aquarius too is um is I think putting all of our powers into technology instead of this technology that is your body and my body. Like our bodies are perhaps the supreme technology. And with Pluto and Aquarius, I think wherever Pluto is kind of like what the culture exalts and worships. And in a way, Aquarius rules our humanity. It rules the people. It also rules technology and futurism. And so, like, at the same time, we're seeing all of these resources being poured into AI. And at the same time, with Pluto and Aquarius, we're seeing, the exploration of things like the telepathy tapes and more people being realized as telepathic and super conscious. And um, I think it's going to be a big decision with Pluto and Aquarius as to how consciousness evolves and where we put these resources. I do feel we have to tap into with Pluto and Aquarius, keep the focus on even technology, the focus on how can it support the good of all humanity versus just longevity for the sake of longevity, or why are we doing all of these things right now, going to Mars and all of this, what will actually support life here now. And Aquarius, also the age of Aquarius, which is a whole other thing we could talk about too, but we are moving from Pisces to Aquarius in the great age cycle. um it's interesting because yeah, with decentralization, we've already started to see that for sure, like with the movement to blockchain from fiat currency, and that's certainly Aquarian. And I think overall in business, like, so many people have been noticing that, you know, alpha generation and other generations don't want to be told what to do and just be a cog in a wheel and be roles. People want to be part of the infrastructure and be part of the building, and that way they feel they want to contribute to it. So it's a very different way of onboarding people that you work with and things like that early on and make them part of the actual system. And then there is a deeper reverence for whatever it is. Say if it's, farmland, okay, how are we going to build the planning of it? And this is going to go where? And I think we're the playing field is absolutely leveling out, and we have to be applying that in our daily lives. Because a top-down model just will not work anymore. There will be uprisings, and we're going to have so many more of these revolutions and uprisings all across the globe until things do start to equalize. And that's what we're seeing right now everywhere. Uprisings, residual from the Pluto and Capricorn top down time when so much of our humanity has been sublimated. And so it's rising up, and hopefully that we do reach that more egalitarian space throughout these next 20 years. I think we are moving into that. This is the kind of rough patch, though, as we're moving between, like, literally all of these stations are changing right now as we're talking. And people are like, wait, where are we? What's going on? Who am I? Where's the world going?
And I feel like
No.
that is the common thread that can bring us back to a grounded place. Like, I love that you opened up our conversation with that of, like, the channel's changing, and because we can go back to that in times when it's like, wait, it feels like everything's changing. Like, why do I feel like I can't get my footing at this time, or things just continue to be moving? It's like, really, astrology, I feel like, is this sacred language that can connect us back and ground us in when times are, turbulent, and there's a lot of change that's transpiring.
Yeah, it definitely gives some sense of validation to the liminality and the what the hell's happening that everybody's feeling. For sure. It's, you're not crazy. Everybody is listening and feeling this. It's like, yes, literally all of the programs started to move, and we're in between spaces right now. We're getting our footing on what is this new future. And also Uranus is moving into Gemini, in July as well. And some more energies moving into the air sign from Taurus to Gemini.
Uranus as, a planet of awakening and quick movement. Like, what does that mean when Uranus moves into Gemini?
We'll talk about consciousness. I mean, Gemini is the sign of the mind. And whenever Uranus moves into Gemini, we have big breakthroughs in communication. Like last time we created computer code. I mean, when Uranus moves into Gemini, it's often consciousness evolves, the mind evolves in new ways, transportation evolves, how we move through reality and how we think. And so, I'm thinking about things like quantum computing, how AI is starting to optimize
Mhm.
the mind in ways, but also the things we have to watch out for in giving all of our power. And I think that's probably one of the most important conversations right now, and defining what it means to be human, because with all of this air, Pluto and Aquarius, Uranus and Gemini, it's like the mind, right? Air rules the mind. So we're saying, okay, let's, expand upon this technology in the mind and see how far we can take this. But we have to ask, what are our values and why? Like, so far, this country you and I are in, like, efficiency, for whatever reason, get it done fast, faster, 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 has been the top ranking value because of capitalism. Okay, let's be first. Let's do it fast. And right, we've created a very sick and tired country because of that. Nobody's really, like, health, mental health, physical health are our biggest problems, yet we're the richest country. But in our stacking order of values, efficiency at the top did not create a healthy society. And we're looking at all these planets moving into air. While that's happening, I think we have to put a lot more attention on recentering, and in our personal lives, redefining what are our values and writing those down in order of hierarchy. And then checking in with your life daily and saying, are my actions actually in line with my values? So it's such a simple thing, but it forces you to stop and change patterns constantly. And I think that's the only way we're going to see real change. Because, yeah, with Uranus and Gemini, um, the mind is certainly getting optimized in ways. And we are also, more and more people are kind of awakening and becoming more telepathic. I'm seeing this all the time. People who have, suddenly had these experiences of deeper precognition and things like that. And also boundaries with the mind too. Like, you might not want somebody tapping into your field and meddling with your mind, right? And same with technology and hacking and things like that. I think we are going to have to get clearer on what we allow in our space and what we don't. But I'm very interested in the power of thought and the resonance of words, because I do think there's going to be more and more science backing, um, things like, I don't know if you read like the intention experiment early on. There was a whole series of studies on intention and words and how those things impact real material life. So I think, with everything moving into air, there's a lot more focus on the power of the mind, the power of words and intention, maybe bringing science into this. So it's going to be interesting for sure to see a lot of these things that it's always like this, that spirituality has kind of talked about, then science is going to start to give rise to and validity. Kind of excited about that part of it.
Mhm. Yeah. And, as you're sharing, it's just this kind of question that is arising around really, this activity around the mind and perhaps mental activity. I feel like it's a place where, so many of us live on a daily basis. And yet perhaps like the deeper invitation of coming home to our hearts and really having, our hearts be the guiding light, and the mind being sort of like, a supporting role as opposed to like the central, hub of navigation. And I feel like perhaps there is this invitation at this time to really come into greater resonance with our own heart field.
Absolutely. And that's also echoed in Jupiter moving up to Cancer, which happens in June, which is a wonderful part of this whole solar system in 2025, because it's also resonating in the space of the heart and care. And on the basis of it all, it's saying with Jupiter and Cancer, it really favors things like the expression of the emotional body, the adherence to what a culture needs for health, families. So we're going to see a lot more attention being put into things like that were considered softer before and overlooked with Jupiter Cancer. So that's moving in June 9th. And it certainly does say whatever we are doing must be coming from the space of the heart. It favors real estate, home environments, love, connection, culture. There's a softer tone of water that's moving into the collective. And it's very necessary to have to really give space to that, give rise to that, kind of tune into that Jupiter and Cancer energy and feel. Uh, Gives more space for feelings and things like that that have been ignored.
Yes. Rebecca, this has been such a supportive conversation to really ground into all the movement that's taking place, and also to really find creative ways to work with the energy that is, unfolding at this time. And so I'm just so grateful for you being here and for sharing. You have such a brilliant perspective, and I love how you weave and tie so much together in such a beautiful way. So thank you for being here. I see your master classes all the time on astrology. So I'd love if you could share just ways that people can connect with you and your work.
Thanks so much, Emily. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation as well. So you all can find me at RebeccaGordonAstrology.com. It's my website, and also at Rebecca Gordon Astrology on Instagram. It's true, we have a suite of certification courses, various kinds of astrology classes, astrology for entrepreneurs. We just launched intermediate class last night actually. But if you'd like to learn astrology, I've been cultivating the school for about 20 years, and every year we improve upon it, and there's a whole suite of classes. So if you want to learn, it's a great community, and I highly recommend the path of astrology. It is forever fascinating, and every day I'm still in awe. So it's a great community. You will learn a lot. And even if you don't want to become a professional astrologer, you start to perhaps learn how astrology applies to whatever it is that you may be doing. And I think it gives us a lot more permission to be ourselves, more compassion for other people, and a greater sense of purpose. Astrology is a beautiful unifying study. Um, Emily, thanks for the opportunity to share into that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Any final words of wisdom to help, guide us through these times?
Well, as we're speaking right now and everything's changing signs, I would just say if you don't feel your footing right now, well, join the club. That is quite all right. So all of us are in that liminality, and like to just be okay for a moment with that being uncomfortable and not knowing. And you don't have to make a decision right now before you know. Um, and to start ultimately trust your instinct. Like this is about regaining our connection to our deeper primal instinct with everything moving into Aries. And I would just say, listen.
Such beautiful words of wisdom. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing. And for everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. So much love and gratitude. We'll see you next time.